Hello again. Now we have arrived at the third lecture, critical thinking. Now we're talking about references. This is a crucial step in your way to become a researcher. The content in this lecture will be flaws, primary sources, secondary sources, references, bad referencing, literature search, reputable sources, critical questions, authenticity and validity, currency and reliability. And all these things are crucial for you as a researcher to master. Flaws, what is that? Well, you can assume a causal link and jump to conclusion. Very common. For instance, I saw John and Sarah sitting on the bench, talking together yesterday evening, so they must therefore have had sex last night. Very quick to get rumors, but you assume a causal link that might not have been there at all. So beware of these causal links. You have false analogies. That means you compare things. The heart functions as a pump. Fine. The defendant in the court case was like a pressure cooker. Okay, we can accept that. But an analogy is false if the two items are not comparable. For instance, cloning of human cells, you copy human cells, is like creating Frankenstein monsters. That's not really comparable. So that's a false analogy. Ad hominem, personal attacks. You're supposed to attack the ball and play with that and not with the persons. You ignore the main opposing arguments. You just go for the marginal argument. That's a flaw. You cherry pick. You pick out only the information that suits you and your overall argument and forget the opposing counter-arguments. That's cherry picking, and that's a no-no in research. Tautologies. You repeat the different words unnecessarily. So the car reversed backwards. Well, that's a tautology. Avoid those. And another academic no-no is no primary nor authoritative sources. You just support your arguments with some readers that's sending in some articles in the local newspaper or similar. That's a weak source. It's not authoritative. You just go to rumors instead of the original, the primary source. So the primary source are very fine. You can use other sources as well, of course, but be careful. The main sources that you use should be primary sources to give you authority. Waffle. Many people, me included, we like waffle. It's so many words. So we tend to cover our message in words. Unnecessary words is waffle. Now, you have to support your arguments with proof, the sources. So primary sources, the raw material or material originating from the time and place of the event. The original author, the original researcher writing about this, that's a primary source. The original source, document, article, report, book, photo, recording. Everybody else talking about this first author, they are secondary sources. I will look at that. Secondary source is different from the primary source. A secondary source can be authoritative and nice, but not necessarily. So secondary sources is material produced at a later stage about the event. Hearsay. Ah, rumors. We love those, don't we? An article telling you about what others have said. For instance, Daily Mail, informing the public about what the Climate Research Institute or the IPCC has said. And these, local newspapers very often do not have a desk of editors. Very often they are not critical, or very little critical at all, to those articles that have appeared. They just put it in. And that means that it is not reliable. It is mainly a rumor, a hearsay, and you should avoid it. Whenever possible, use the primary source. The secondary source might have quoted or paraphrased incorrectly. Maybe they have added their own, often false, interpretation. They can have used secondary weak sources or misunderstood the whole thing. Taken the quote out of context. Very common that suddenly you see that a researcher is given the impression that he means something completely different than what he really means. Very unfortunate. So you take quote out of context. Avoid that. The purported primary source might not exist at all. That's a no-no again in the academic world. And when you cling to your secondary sources, you don't know. Just accept it. It is a lot of work to be a researcher. You have to go to the library. You have to check up your sources. Don't trust them just because you find them in a book. References enable you to check whether the source material actually exists. Check it out. The source material has been presented in a correct and accurate way. Check it out. Don't trust it. The source contains what the author has claimed. The source contains additional information of interest. So all these means that people are interested in your sources. Make it easy to find them. Bad referencing. You plagiarize. You just copy a source from a primary source, but you haven't checked it. And you just copy without really telling anybody. It might be superficial. Your quote source you don't know well. And if you are not sure you understand what you quote, it might really not support your overall argument. Smoke screening, you just refer to a book or an author, but you don't give the page number. And if that book you quote has 600 pages, you cannot ask your reader to look through that book to find your quote. So even if you think that you don't really have to give the page number, do give it. Otherwise, you do the sin of smoke screening. And of course, there is something called hot air. You claim the source says more than it actually does. And it can, of course, be deceptive. Primary source says something else than you claim, or does not even exist. Then you deceive your readers. And that's not very good. You have to do a good literature research. Find out what has been written. Yes, read a book, read the article, and collate list of sources potentially relevant. But there are so many sources, so you have to be careful. You have to select your sources. So make the list, go down the list, select the sources for initial investigation or relevance. Is it relevant? Is it not? And browse selected items to find the most useful sources. You don't have the time for anything else. Select the most relevant sources and browse the abstracts. The abstracts contain summaries of the main arguments and findings. And this is why we teachers at this university insist that you put some efforts into writing the abstract. Get used to it, because the abstract is very often the only thing that other researchers will ever read of your article. If your abstract is bad, nobody continues reading your article. If your abstract is good, yes, interesting, I can proceed. As a researcher, you always have to ask critical questions to yourself and others. Let's have a look at those questions. 1. How do we know it is true? How reliable is the source? And are the examples given really representative, or are they marginal? Does this match what I already know? If not, can I trust it? Be skeptical? Should I accept it? Does this contradict other evidence? Maybe a counter-argument. What motive might the author have for saying this? What are we not being told that actually might be interesting to think of? Are other explanations possible? Find the other perspectives. Do the reasons support the conclusion? Is the line of reasoning well supported by evidence? This is important, and you have to be comfortable that your sources support you well enough. The next short lecture will be about sources. How do we look at them a bit closer?